All right, thanks for having me back for the 7th Laracon EU. It's been an awesome journey to this point, and I can't believe it's gotten, turned into such a huge conference. I never expected that when I was hacking away on Laravel in my apartment 7 or 8 years ago. Anyway, thank you to Sean and his team, all the sponsors, the venue for making this event possible, and for putting in so much work into it. Thank you to Frank and Marcel for all the cool ignition and Flare stuff. I think that'll really help boost your productivity debugging errors, especially those view errors and the compiled blade files. And Flare, interestingly, was actually the first application on Laravel Vapor besides Vapor itself. So perhaps maybe the first serverless error tracking application out there. So at Laracon US, I've, as you probably know, talked about Laravel Vapor, a serverless deployment platform for Laravel that we've already let about 1,000 people into the product, and everyone will get access to it probably in about 10 days or so. We'll probably let another 1,000 in next week, and I have to release Laravel 6.0 next week. So next week's pretty busy, but the week after that, you will all be able to access Vapor and play around with it. So about Laravel 6.0, which is kind of what I want to focus on for this talk and demo some of my favorite features in the new version. So if you haven't been out to the documentation, to the 6.0 version of the documentation, which you can switch to right up here, this is an LTS release of Laravel. So we do LTS releases, which are long-term support releases, every 2 years. The last one, as you can see in the little table here, was Laravel 5.5 back in August of 2017, which was released around the same time as Laracon EU, as usual. And so that means we are due for another LTS release. So LTS releases of Laravel get 2 years of general bug fixes, and they get 3 years of security fixes, which we don't have very much of typically, but knock on wood. So I usually recommend that people try to stick with the 6-month releases just because it makes your upgrading a little easier because you're not having to do 2 years worth of upgrades. But sometimes there's corporate policies or your manager or whatever feels more comfortable with LTS, so that's why we provide those releases. So the upgrade guide is actually already up online. And if you hear Laravel 6.0 and you've been around the Laravel ecosystem for a while, you might think that it's a huge paradigm-shifting change because maybe you remember the change from Laravel 4 to Laravel 5, or even more, even bigger change was Laravel 3 to Laravel 4. But that's actually not the case here, and the reason we're going to 6.0, as I mentioned at Laracon US, is because the framework itself is adopting semantic versioning. So that means for any change that has a breaking change, no matter how insignificant that breaking change might be, we release a new major version. So that will occur, of course, every 6 months, like usual, but there's really no change to the overall upgrade cycle except the versioning convention. So if you come out here to the upgrade guide, and you can see some of the medium impact changes and the high impact changes that probably affect a lot of applications. But we've estimated the upgrade time at about 1 hour for most applications. Some will be much faster than this. I don't expect very many at all will be much longer than that. Most of you will probably be able to upgrade actually in 10 or 15 minutes. Anyway, so you can go ahead and browse around the documentation now. You don't have to wait until next week when it's released. And you could even start working on that in a branch of your application. All right, so let's dive into some of the interesting things in Laravel 6. The first thing I want to show you is if I pull up a blank Laravel application. This is just a Laravel 6 application. And I hop into my resources directory or my SAS directory. You'll see that the SAS file is empty. And you'll also notice that there's no example view component in the resources directory. That's been removed out of the default scaffolding for one main reason, which is over the years there's been quite a bit of confusion about why is there a default view component in Laravel? Does that mean I have to use Vue when I use Laravel? What if I like React or whatever other JS framework I'm into? And that created kind of some unnecessary confusion. So what I've done is extract that into a package called Laravel UI. And so if you want that scaffolding back in your Laravel 6 application, you can just composer require Laravel UI. And once that's has installed, you get all the same scaffolding at your fingertips. So the Vue scaffolding, the React scaffolding, and we're working on Tailwind scaffolding as well. So once that's installed, you would just run artisan UI Vue with the auth scaffolding. Say I want like the login pages, the registration pages, and it generates it all for you. And if we go look at our project, we can see the example component is back. So this has gotten us back to the Laravel 5.8 starting point. So you just pull in that package, run that command, and you're right back to where you were. But out of the box, Laravel 6.0 is a little lighter on the front-end scaffolding than the previous few releases. All right, so I'm just going to get out of that and head back to my main demo application. All right, so I've got this file here where I want to demo some of these features that I think are pretty handy and pretty cool in Laravel 6.0. And the first thing I want to start with is these authorization exceptions and authorization messages and gates and stuff like that. And Chris gave a really good overview of the authorization features in Laravel yesterday. So when you write an authorization policy in Laravel, many times I think most users of Laravel return a Boolean value. They return true or false. So for example, I've got this flight model, which represents some airline flight, and I've got a flight policy, and I want to authorize if the user can view this flight. Now, if we hop into the flight policy and look at that view method, this is what we're used to seeing, right? Return true or false. And so then if we hit this code, we catch that exception, and we try to dump out the message that we get back from this exception. Let's hit this route. You'll see that we get a generic message that was kind of baked into the framework. This action is unauthorized. So it's just a very generic message. It doesn't give us any more information about why the action was unauthorized or anything like that. All right, so you could always, this is not new to Laravel 6, but you could always actually return a more detailed message from your policies, which I'm not sure how many Laravel users are aware of this. So if we go back to our flight policy, let's get rid of this return false. You can actually call this return deny and then pass a more specific authorization message about why this particular user could not perform this action, which can be pretty helpful actually. So now if we do this and we basically run the same code where we catch the exception and get the message, and maybe we want to look at the message, let's just dump it out. So if we hit this auth exception route, now we get the more specific message that we return from our policy. But what's new in Laravel 6 is this gate inspect method. So you'll see how cumbersome this kind of is. So if I wanted to try to look at if the user was authorized or not and then interact with the message that was actually returned from the policy, I had to do this whole song and dance where I try and catch the exception and then get the message in a variable and then move on with my application flow. So if I wanted to do something with the message or send it somewhere or whatever, it was just a little cumbersome to interact with. So in Laravel 6, we've added this gate inspect method. This was added by a community member named Gary Green on GitHub. So now we can call gate inspect, ask if the view ability on the flight model, so it's going to call the flight policy view method, and then we get this nice response, which is an authorization response instance. And on this object, we can ask if the authorization passed or failed, and we can also get the message right here. So let's hit this route. All right, so it did not pass, and we get our specific authorization message just like we expected. All right, and of course, if we comment that out and let it fall down into this authorize call, now gate authorize, it doesn't return true or false. As Chris noted yesterday, it actually just throws an authorization exception. So if we hit this now, this same route, now we get the 403 page and we get our specific error message. And likewise, if this was an API request, Laravel sees when you send the headers like accept application JSON, and when we make this same request to this route here, we get the specific error message in the JSON payload. So if you're displaying it to your user, you can give a more informative message on why they were not able to perform some action in your application. And if you're doing this from a gate, so when you're doing a gate, you have a closure, so you don't have access to this deny. So you can actually call return response deny, where response is an instance of illuminate auth access response right here. So if you use gates and closures, you can still basically do the same thing using the gates. So custom denial message returned from response deny, and if I hit the gate route, I get my custom denial message. So a pretty simple feature, actually, but one that can make your life a little easier and also improve the UX of your application, letting you give kind of more friendly error messages. All right, so one question I got actually recently was, how do you do something like interrupt the whole request of an application in the flow of the request where you might not expect to be able to? So for example, this person wanted to have a route binding that sometimes returned a redirect. And this is how you set up a route binding. So I have this route bind / something as the parameter. So if I hit like bind / Taylor, I have this custom bind callback, which just casts the value to uppercase. So let's just hit this route, bind foo, and we get uppercase foo. Now, we can't return a response from here because this is what gets injected into the route. But what you can actually do to kind of simulate this authorization exception stuff in your own code, if you have that need, is you can return an HTTP response exception. So I can say throw new HTTP response exception, where maybe this is a redirect response to like the home route or something. And so now, if the binding fails, let's pretend we return or we throw this exception, and Laravel will see that HTTP response exception and extract the response from it and send that to the browser as the response. So it lets you kind of hijack the request cycle early. So now if we hit this, we get redirected to the landing page. So I just wanted to throw that in there as kind of like, if you wanted to recreate that authorization exception type thing, that's how you would do it in your own packages or applications. All right, moving on to an entirely new thing, subquery improvements. This was contributed by Jonathan Rennig. I actually used some of this while I was building Laravel Vapor. But in this example, we're going to have a destination model and a flight model. And destinations are going to be cities, like we have Amsterdam, and then we have Little Rock, where I live. And we're just going to add flights to them. So we're going to add a couple flight seats. So for Amsterdam, I'm going to add a new flight that arrived a couple hours ago, and then I'm going to add a flight that arrived 1 hour ago. So like KLM 100, KLM 200. Little Rock, I'm going to do the same thing. 2 flights, one arrived 2 hours ago, one arrived 10 minutes ago. Now, pretend we have a situation where we want to select the destinations, but we also want to select the name of the last flight that arrived at that destination. So there's a couple ways we could do this. We could pull both, like in 2 queries, pull the destinations, pull their flights, then sort of get the last flight that arrived at that destination. But using the new subquery features in Laravel 6, we can actually do this in a single query using the eloquent query builders. And this is what it looks like. So I do destination, and then I add select, and then I create my own name for this. This isn't a true column, I'm just assigning it any name I want to. We'll call it last flight. And then as the value of this, I pass a query builder, an eloquent query builder in this case. And I want to say, for the last flight, I want that to be flight select name, where the column destination ID matches the ID of the destination on the parent table, ordered by when they arrived, and we'll just take the last one because we want the latest one that arrived. All right, so then if we return this, if we hit the subquery route, now we get Amsterdam and the name of the flight that last arrived at Amsterdam, and we get Little Rock and the name of the flight that last arrived at Little Rock, and we did that in a single query, which can be quite a bit more performant. If you haven't watched Jonathan Renick's talk at Laracon US, which is available on YouTube for free, definitely go back and watch that, because he demos some situations where you can do stuff like this and save a lot of memory and a lot of kind of CPU processing in your applications. All right, so that's a select subquery. Now we also added order by subqueries. So in this example, we want to sort the destinations by their latest arrived flight time. So in this example, it looks like Little Rock has the latest arrived flight because it arrived 10 minutes ago. And both of the Amsterdam flights arrived at least 1 hour ago. So we would expect to get Little Rock first and then Amsterdam because it had the flight that arrived the latest. So in this example, I kind of show you how you might do it before or without this subquery feature. So I pull the destination, eager loading in the flights. Then I sort by the latest arrived flight. So I have to sort the destination's flights for each destination by the arrived at timestamp. And then we should have them in the right order using these collection operations. So let's hit this route. We get Little Rock first, as we expected, and then we get Amsterdam. So that's how you might implement it now. Using the order by subqueries, we can actually do it a little cleaner and using less queries, only one query to the database. So we'll say destination order by descending, and again, we just pass it in Eloquent Query Builder. Flight select arrived at, where the destinations match. We order by the arrive time in descending order, and we take the first one. So we want it to order by this. If we hit this, we get the same results, Little Rock and Amsterdam, in the order we expected. And we can dump out this SQL, just kind of see what it's doing. And you can see there's the order by with the subquery. And we can dump out the SQL for the some of these early examples. Let's look at this one. And there's the select, where we did the subquery select to get the last flight name out of for the destination. So actually pretty clean syntax to do some kind of interesting queries and to save round trips to your database. All right, and the last kind of subquery we added was from subqueries. This is something I don't reach for as often, but it's really handy when you need it. So for this example, I have users that have donations. Each user can have many donations. So if we look at the user model and go to the donations method, it's just a basic has many relationship. But I'm just kind of factoring out a few with random donation amounts. So I give each user 3 donations of random integers between, like, let's see, 1 and 100. And what I want to do is I want to sum up all the donations for each user by user ID, and then I want to average the sum of those donations across users, if that makes sense. So I want to look at all my users and say, over the lifetime of their usage of this donation platform, what's the average donation amount? Now, you might think you could do something like this, where you could say, select average and then sum amount as total from donations grouped by user ID. Looks pretty legit. Looks like it might work. However, if you try to run this query on the right route, you will get an error, a nice ignition error, that says this is an invalid query because MySQL actually does not allow you to nest aggregate functions like this. So from subqueries to the rescue here, basically. We can actually just pass a closure to the table method now of the query builder, where this is what we're going to select from. So we want to select the sum of the amount as the total from the donations grouped by user ID, and then from that, we are going to select the average total. All right, kind of tricky. So if we run this, we get the average total summed across all users for the lifetime of the app. So pretty cool and pretty powerful when you need it. But again, maybe not something you use every day, but hopefully helpful in those situations where you have that need. All right, moving on, job middleware. Totally new topic here. This was something that was born out of 2 things. It was born out of some of the stuff I did in Laravel Vapor, and then it came out of an idea on the Laravel/ideas GitHub repository, which sort of confirmed this in my mind. So if you're not familiar with this, there is a GitHub repository called Laravel/ideas. We never really closed these issues. It's just like kind of a sounding board where you can put an idea out there. I really encourage you, if you have an idea, to go ahead and throw it out there. And then also, even if you don't, go look through this and leave like a thumbs up emoji on the ideas you do like, because it's really helpful to me because I can actually sort those issues by thumbs up or something like that. And I can see what are sort of the most requested ideas across the framework. Some of these may have even been implemented already. Again, I don't really come out here and close them. It's just sort of this perpetual idea board where you can throw ideas out there. All right, so anyway, I read through every single one of those ideas actually about a month or 2 ago, just looking for things that seemed like pretty easy wins. And this job middleware thing was one of them, and I had actually had the problem myself. So first, how many of you love magic code? So in my opinion, this is the most magical code in Laravel. I'm being totally serious. So what would you think is some of the most magical code in Laravel? Like, what comes to mind? Facades? Anything else? What, DD? Okay, so to me, facades are nothing compared to just dispatching a job. Very magical, and I want to kind of demo that for you real quick. So I don't want you to spoil this if you were in Miguel's unconference talk, but let's go ahead and look at what I'm doing here. So I'm going to go to this update flight status job, and I'm going to comment some stuff out because I want to demo something real quick. So we'll come back to this Redis throttling later. So for now, I'm just going to queue a job, and it's just going to write out the name of the flight that's being processed by this job. All right, so if I create 5 flights, we would expect in our logs to see flight 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Which is probably what we'll see. So let's go ahead and start up a queue worker. I've got a little bash alias for this. Let's fire up some jobs. Dispatch. Looks like they all processed. If we look at our log, I should have cleared it out. Let me run it again. All right, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So great. That's about what we expected. Now, which method queues the job here? Because I can do this, and this should work the same, basically, if we fire it. So we did it again. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So it must not be the dispatch method. I can do this to add the queue. It should work the same. It keeps working. So what actually queues the job? That's kind of the mystery. And the reason we went with the solution we did, so I'm not going to spoil it for you, is because I didn't want to have to do this, like send, or like, you have to have some method to like end the chain for queuing the job. And I didn't want to clutter up the whole flow of queuing the job with this like ugly method you have to tack on the end that's only purpose is to like say go. So I'll show you why it's really magic, and hopefully you don't stop using Laravel because of this. Okay, let's clear out the log. I'm just going to set this to a variable. I'm going to restart the worker, dispatch, 22, 23, 24, 25, 21. So definitely some weird black magic there because we set that to a variable and it became the last job to execute instead of the first job to execute. All right, so your homework is to find out why that is, and you can tweet me about it. Do you not know what it is? Oh, okay. All right, so let's get back to the topic at hand here. You now know the darkest Laravel magic, seriously, in my opinion. Way more magical than facades. All right, so job middleware. This is a new feature in Laravel 6.0. I'm going to bring back in that Redis code that I had in this job. Whoops. All right, so in this job, I only want to allow one of these jobs to run every 5 seconds. So I can do this using the Redis throttling features in Laravel, where I say Redis throttle in some unique key that represents sort of this task. Block for 0 seconds, allow one every 5 seconds. And if we get a lock, then this first callback will execute. If we do not get a lock, the second callback will execute, and we'll just release the job for 5 seconds so we can try again later. All right, so it's just a simple job throttling mechanism. So now let me restart my queue worker since we changed that code. And if we come back in here to this dispatch route, so we can see all the jobs like tried to get the lock immediately, and only one of them got it. And then we'll see them try again. There they all tried again, but only 1 per second is able to run. All right, so if we check the log, we're getting like 26, 27, 28 every 5 seconds, as we can see. All right, so that's all kind of well and good, but the problem with this, and the problem I ran into on Vapor, is it really like noises up your whole handle method of your job. And it just becomes kind of annoying because in the handle method, I just really want to have the logic of this job, and I don't really want all this throttling logic in the method. And so there's a couple ways you could approach this. So like on Vapor, the solution I took, which I just pop open the Vapor source code. So I have this deployment step job that it does some stuff in the handle method, like it does some stuff. Okay, it updates some database records. It like catches exceptions, just some Vapor stuff. And so I created this base deployment step class so that I could sort of have this extension point that all the jobs got the same method. But the problem with that is now I have to like invent this other method name that actually like does the job logic, because now I've already used handle, and that just becomes kind of nasty too. So if I hop into one of these jobs, you can see it extends deployment step, and now I have to call this execute instead of handle. Okay, so it just didn't feel like that great, but I didn't have a better solution at the time. All right, so the solution that we came up for Laravel 6.0 is job middleware, which is very similar to request middleware. So what it kind of looks like is in my app jobs directory, I have this middleware folder where I have this rate limited middleware. And it looks a lot like a route middleware, except instead of a request, it receives the command, the queued command, and we receive the next callback just like a route middleware. And this is where I'll put my Redis throttling logic. So here I do basically the same thing, allow one job every 5 seconds. If we get a lock, we just call next with the command, just like we kind of would on like a route middleware. If we couldn't obtain the lock, we just call command release, just like we were doing in the jobs handle method. So pretty nice. And then if we go back to this sort of middleware version of the rate limited flight status update thing, you can see my handle method stays clean. And I can just return an array of middleware from here in the job of middleware I want to run around this job, basically. So I'm going to run my rate-limited middleware. And if this all works right, we should basically see the same behavior as we saw up here. So if I hit the middleware route, you can see it basically looks the same. They're all trying to get the lock, but it's all using the middleware instead of being in our handle method, which makes it a lot cleaner. We could put that middleware method in a trait and then pull it into different classes. And what's really nice is, say we wanted to wrap more logic around the job, which would have been really nasty if we were like extending a class, and now what do? We can only really extend one class and blah, blah, blah. Now all we can do is come in and add a new middleware right here to the stack and sort of layer logic around our queued jobs. All right, so I think it really cleans up a lot of that logic and gives you a nice solution, especially in that rate limiting use case or logging or any kind of middleware-ish type logic, a good place to put it. All right, so that's basically the queue middleware feature. The next feature I want to talk about is lazy collections, which was the brainchild of Laravel community member Joseph Silber, who's actually come up with quite a few cool Laravel features over the years. This is a really slick feature that I think you'll like. So to get started, first I want to kind of review PHP iterators and generators. So how many of you use PHP generators or know like how to write them? A few people, good. I'm glad it's not like a ton of people. I actually was not super pro at them until I kind of started hacking around on this feature with Joseph. So to kind of give you a brief review, an iterator in PHP is this class, or it's an interface actually, that you can implement. And I've done this Fibonacci iterator that does the Fibonacci number sequence. And so to create one in PHP, you have to implement this core iterator interface, and it has like a handful of methods like current, key, next, rewind, valid, and I don't know. I probably have to go look this up every time I've ever written one. But all it does is like keeps track of the state. So each time we loop through, we add the previous number to the current number, and we get the new number, like your standard Fibonacci algorithm. Okay, but you have to implement all these methods. And then when you create one, you can for each through it, just like an array of things. And we'll just dump out the number to make sure it's working. All right, so we get the Fibonacci sequence up to a certain point. Now, what generators did when they came out in PHP is they let you do the same thing without a lot of the class boilerplate. So they let you just have a function. In this case, I'm just doing an inline callback, anonymous function. And whereas most functions would typically return once, a generator function can return any number of times, as many times as it needs, actually, to iterate through its values. So this is another implementation of the Fibonacci sequence using a generator, where we're basically doing the same logic. We're adding the previous number to the current number, and then instead of returning, you just say yield, and that gives the next value to the for each loop. And if you don't yield anything, the for each loop is over. So it's kind of nice because you don't have to implement any class or interfaces. You don't have to remember which methods to implement, all that. It's just like a really lightweight function. And then if we can just for each through it, and it should give us the same response as before. So if we call it generator, we get the Fibonacci sequence just like before. So I just wanted to review that real quick just so you can kind of see what PHP generators are, because they're used really heavily in lazy collections. All right, so let's take a look at a couple examples of how you might use this. So first, we're not going to use lazy collections. We're just going to use a regular collect helper, illuminate support collection class. How many of you use collections? Probably a lot. Okay, really nice, immutable interface for working with collections of data. So I've written this big log file that's 500,000 lines long. All right, so it's a pretty big log file. And what we want to do is basically collect it and iterate through every line of the file, reject any lines that start with the string ignore, map all of the lines into this log entry class that maybe we can do stuff with, and then I'm just going to kind of keep track of how many lines we're iterating through in this each callback. And then at the end, I'll say we iterated through however many lines, and we used this much megabytes of memory to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and give this a shot and see what happens. We actually ran out of memory, so we got an ignition. We were up pretty high on memory, like over 100 megabytes. Sometimes I can actually get it to come back. There we go. Iterated. We had one blank line at the end, so we iterated 500,000 in one line, so we used 133 megs of memory to do that. All right, this is a perfect case for a lazy collection. So a lazy collection, we call lazy collection make, and we pass it a generator function. In this case, we're going to open the log file, get each line individually, and then yield it back to the collection. Now, what's cool is we can use all or most of the same collection methods that we're used to. So we still get a really nice, fluent interface for dealing with all of this data. However, watch what happens to the memory consumption when I run this. Let's call the lazy route. Iterated over 500,000 lines, used 3 megabytes of memory. And it's really cool how this is implemented under the hood. If you go look at the lazy collection class and something like the filter method, you can see that it creates immutable collections, kind of like the normal collection, but each one is generated with a new generator function. And it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around at first, but say you had 2 filter methods back to back, it creates one lazy collection with the first generator, and then when we come through and call another filter, we create a new one, and then this right here is the previous generator, and then we have our new generator inside of that. So it's pretty wild and pretty interesting implementation, but huge memory savings when you're working with big data sets. All right, so let's go a little bit further and look, how can we apply this to database queries? So more commonly, for us, we're dealing with data rather than big log files. So I'm going to go ahead and seed my database with 30,000 users. All right, this should take a few seconds to run on my laptop. Go ahead and get a lot of eloquent objects going. Go, go, go. Does it feel like lunch? Sorry. Catering lunch for an event this size is extremely hard. It's just extremely difficult. Anyway, so we have a lot of users in the database. Let's look at using the typical way we might have done this before. So let's pull all of the users. Now, this isn't a super smart way to filter users because I could have done this in a where clause. However, let's just pull the users, filter through them in this very naive way, excluding or keeping only the users that have an ID greater than 500. We'll keep track of how many times we iterated. We'll keep track of the memory, just like we did before. All right, so route all 29,500 users, 47 megs of memory. Great. All right. Now, this isn't the smartest way to do it. On Laravel 5.8, you could probably use something like this, a chunk. So this chunks in queries of like 200 users at a time. So that means your Laravel application doesn't have to hydrate 29,000 eloquent models at once, all in memory. And it can only keep 200 at a time in memory, which is going to be way less memory. All right. So let's go ahead and run this chunk thing. Again, we're going to chunk, and for each chunk, we're going to filter all the users with an ID greater than 500 and keep track of how many times we're iterating. All right, so if I hit chunk here, I'm dumping out every query. You can see our memory went way down, so that's good, and we iterated through a lot of users, but we have a lot of database queries. Yeah. We have a lot of database queries, so that's the downside. All right, so memory way down, database queries way up. And usually I find myself doing this kind of thing like in a artisan console command. Like say you have an application and you need to spin through every user because you need to update something about the user, and the only way to do it is to spin through every user. Have you ever had that situation? Am I the only one that's ever had that? All right, so that's usually when I have to spin through a lot of data like this. So what's cool is in Laravel 6, we've actually updated the cursor method to use lazy collections now, instead of returning just a raw generator. So what's really cool, I'm going to dump out the queries again, and then I'm going to call app user cursor. I can chain a filter method on there. I can even do a higher order proxy collection method on the lazy collection. I have a user isAdmin method that just returns true all the time. And we'll keep track of how many times we're iterating, and again, how much memory we're using, and we'll see how many queries we're executing. So if I call cursor, we get one query, 29,500 eloquent models, 3 megs of memory. All right, so way down, only a single query to the database. And remember, we started with 29,000 eloquent objects and almost 50 megs of memory. So really cool new feature to iterate through lots of eloquent objects while not bogging down a lot of your server's memory and keeping things nice and clean, and you still get a really nice fluent interface with the collection methods that you're used to. So really great feature in Laravel 6.0. All right, and thanks. And of course, all of this combined with the new open source error debugging stuff from Frank and Marcel, I think comes together to make a really nice maintenance release for Laravel. Again, nothing paradigm shifting, not have to rewrite your whole application, but some decent quality of life improvements that can improve your performance, your memory usage, and just your overall developer experience. So I hope you enjoy it. Fingers crossed it'll be out next week, barring any big problems. Shout out to Dries, who's been helping. He works for Laravel full-time, helping maintain our open source stuff. Also, thank you to Mohammed for him holding down the fort on Forge and Envoyer and Vapor. And of course, we've added our latest team member, James Brooks from the UK, who has been seriously pumping out some Nova features. So I get asked sometimes, like, what's the deal with Nova? And stuff like that, like it's dead or something, but go out there and look, and there's like multiple releases this month, last month, and with really cool features. So if you haven't looked at Nova in a while, David and James have been killing it on the Nova front, so go check that out too. All right, so thank you so much.